Okay, all right, let's get started. So, hello everyone. I think at the end of the day, the energy is a bit low because I think it's a rainy day in Tokyo and quite long for me. So, I hope you guys had a great day at office today. Uh, and let's get started. So, I would like to first introduce myself. So, my name is Snehal, and I'm currently working as an engineering director at Mercari. And today we are going to talk a little bit about how did I navigate um, in the IT sector, especially in Japan, which is so much out of my comfort zone. So this is basically my career journey. I started in 2008 as an iOS engineer. Oh, sorry, as an iOS intern, and later on changed bit of roles, moved into different types of organizations that were from startups to big organizations like IBM. I moved into different countries, even tried to change my tech stack, and as you can see on the portfolio, I even changed my role from a technical to a managerial position. So if you notice in this slide, like I have added flags instead of adding the name of the companies. And many people will be wondering why. Because I think the most frequent question that has been asked to me when somebody meets me is like, why did you move from Singapore to here? Like, what brought you to London and all? So, why do you think like people usually ask such kind of questions? Because people usually and naturally are curious about each other's life experiences, like what they have gone through and what they are trying to achieve in their life. And people also tend to learn from such question about the different cultures and lifestyles that you have encountered so far. People try to find a common ground by creating a connection and trying to seek a common ground where they can relate to you. And some people are genuinely just interested in your story of why did you move from one country to another. And some people try to also understand like what is your motivation, and like is your motivation work, is it a different kind of experience or something like that. And there are many more ways in which people try to uh, like take your answer as. So why did I move to Japan instead of moving somewhere else? So for me, the main reason why I moved to Japan was Mercari, because the company was undergoing a cultural shift where they were trying to become more global. And also they were undergoing a growth shift where they were trying to, achieve ambitious product features. And I felt that I had a lot to offer in those situations, mostly from the organizational point of view. And I also wanted to learn from really great people who are working there. And the second reason for me was work-life balance. And of course, third is food and weather. Who can, I believe that plays a very important role for me because I stayed mostly in tropical countries. So it was pretty interesting to move to a country where they had four weathers. So when I landed in Japan and it was my first day, I was looking at the Mori Tower in Roppongi and I was like, wow, this is the place where I'm going to work at. And I was super excited and super pumped up, like I can do anything. But when my first day ended and when I was walking out, my face was like this. So many people will ask me, like, why? Like, what changed in those few hours that make me go from happy to a really Our face. So for me, what changed was basically I had to use an extensive use of Google Translate, as I was not a Japanese speaker at that time. I had to use a lot of sign language to ask for direction. Even I had to point for food menus to say like, "Hey, I would like to have something like this." And it felt very weird. Like nobody was shaking hands when they first meet you because it's kind of a normal thing to do in other countries like Singapore, Malaysia, or London. And I was not being called by my first name. And I was confused twice on what was displayed and what was said during the orientation session because many of the things got lost in the translation. And everybody, like whoever I met, said thank you and sorry for many, many times. And there were a lot of, like formal gestures during that duration. So 1 month into the job, and I was having all these alarms beeping every single place, like, am I going to survive in Japan or am not going to survive in Japan? So I had to basically change how I work. And of course, like for good reason and in a good way. So, what basically helped me? I wanted to share this with everybody because I think it's very important, not just for Japan, but for any other country where you want to make a move. So, for me, it was my motto of um, which I tend to abide by so much. It's learn, unlearn, and relearn. So, what do I mean by that? So, learning to adopt is super, super important because it is like quite vital. And when you move to a new country, the cultural nuances you really need to understand, like how do we how it differs from your country of origin or from other countries. You even need to change your communication styles, and you need to adapt to those communication styles. Like right now in this meeting, I'm speaking quite slow, which is not my usual speaking speed. It's quite fast. But the reason I'm adapting to this because I know there are many people in the audience who for whom English is not their first language. So I believe learning to adapt to such kind of things is super, super important. Also, especially the decision making process, because there often are often in the organization, there are different way in which the decisions are made. And every country, every culture has their own way of making decisions. Some decisions are top down, some decisions are more like consensus based and all. The second thing that I basically needed to unlearn was my preconceptions. Because I felt that I was not being effective in the job because I had a lot of pre-consensus about uh, it can be done very fast, or it needs to be done in this way to be really effective. And I had to basically unlearn those practices because it was hindering with the effectiveness of me being a very good manager. Then I have to relearn the strategies for success that are basically quite effective in current Japan's market. So this means that I need to adapt to new leadership style where I was more of a direct leader. I had to change that to become more like an empathetic leader. And I had to relearn some of those skills to adopt to such kind of diverse organization. And it also became very difficult to even have communication because in some cultures the context is very important, and to do effective communication I had to adapt to different styles of doing that and how I can basically try to ensure that everybody is aligned on the end goal and the message itself. And also relearn how to do conflict resolution in Japanese context, where the culture itself is very, very different compared to, other overseas companies. The second thing that helped me was developing my culture intelligence. Often people know about IQ, they know about EQ, but many people don't know about CQ. And I think it's very, very important if you're thinking about making your next shift, or even you're trying to manage diverse uh, team of people that come from different backgrounds or from different culture. So to increase the cultural awareness, or to understand each other's values or beliefs or social norm, it's very, very important to understand that aspect to manage the people effectively. So how can we do these things? We can do these things by reading books, watching documentaries, and engaging people from diverse backgrounds. And one of my favorite book is Culture Map, and I would recommend every single manager to read it, or even a person who feel like they are trapped in such kind of situation. I would recommend them to read it. It has quite very, very good effective strategies in which you can apply. And then you need to, how what is the second way of developing this is by practicing empathy. So we need to understand each other's perspective and experience. And the only way we can understand that is by doing active listening, um, asking genuine questions, and asking them in form of an interest, or in from a point of a cultural difference, instead of trying it as like, what do you say, like raising it as a question for them. The third way to develop cultural intelligence is by developing interpersonal skills. It's basically having communication, having empathy, and enhancing your conflict resolution skills. And I think in that way, you should be able to have meaningful discussions within the teams, outside the teams, within two people, or within different stakeholders. The fourth thing would be seeking feedback. And this feedback is super important for you, because the feedback can allow you to self-reflect and deviate as well, so that it can allow for you to do continuous improvement for the process. So for me, when I joined as a manager in Mercari, I would just like to share an example here. So when I joined in Mercari, like people used to attack, was not calling my first name, and that really bothered me. I understood like it was a very cultural differences. So I needed to ask them in a way like, hey, is it okay if you call me just Sneha instead of calling Sneha-san? I don't get offended by it, but I would really love if you can just call me Sneha. And after that, like many of the people started calling me that, but again, there was a point where they needed to really, some of the other people in some different divisions started calling me that. And I had to self-reflect that I had to live with these two things together, and I cannot get rid of it forever. The fifth point, which is most important one, is about building relationships. And how do we do that? Because it is very, very essential when we are doing cross-cultural communication and collaboration to build relationships with them. It can be on basis of trust. It can be on the basis of task-based form, but to work cohesively and trying to understand each other in a much better manner, we have to focus on building relationship. It shouldn't be just like, I just do this for you and that's it. um, but it should be more about like trying to create more meaningful relationship, so that we can develop our cultural intelligence. All right. So the third thing that helped me was a hybrid culture shift in diverse teams. So what do I mean by that? So as I mentioned in my previous example, like when I when you come in from a different perspective, uh, you can adopt to the style of the country itself. So, for example, in my one-on-one, I used to ask my members, like, hey, what kind of communication you prefer? You prefer a low context communication or high context communication? So then when some people say that they prefer a low context communication, then I'm like, okay, this is how I'm going to communicate with you moving forward. So understanding such kind of details upfront will really help you to manage the situation in a better way. The second thing is more about providing feedback. So to give an example was when I joined, it was December 2019. And as a new manager, I had to start providing feedbacks in January. So which I did. But there were certain situations where I didn't understand because I was working with another manager and it was like a 2-in-1 feedback session. And the feedback, when it was provided, the member said, like, how can I action on it? There is nothing for me to action on these points. So I believe like when we are providing feedback, we have to provide a direct, constructive, negative feedback so that it can be perceived by the people and it can be more actionable way. To introduce this, it took me a bit longer, but once everybody understood it, it became much more easier. So it became like a second agenda in my one-on-one doc whenever I have like a new member who I am managing, then I just ask them like, hey, what kind of feedback do you prefer? Like, do you prefer a direct, constructive, negative feedback? Or do you want me to not provide you with a negative feedback? Um, the third thing to make this kind of shift in the organization is improving processes. Um, because when I joined Mercari at the time, they were like, I had to get alignment from 7 different stakeholders, and it was time consuming. It used to sometimes take like 1 month or 1.5 months to agree on something. So what we started doing is we started implementing processes which are basically semi-consensual basis. What do I mean by that is we started introducing processes where you do not require everybody to say yes, but you just require maybe out of 5 people, 2 people to say yes. It's something like pull request review. You do not want every single person to approve your pull request. You can just ask like 2 people to approve your pull request. Um, the fourth thing was more about conflict resolution. So when I joined, I had to encourage people to voice out their difference in opinion, but also disagree and commit at some point in case their views doesn't match with the other people's views. In the starting, it was a bit difficult, but when people got used to it, it started giving rise to much more much more constructive decisions as well as good decision making process. And the last point would be more about training, because I think sometime even as an individual who has worked in diverse, who has a diverse background, we can have unconscious bias. So during this time, during the training, what we did is we did a scenario-based workshop with many of the EMs within the organization and asked them like, hey, this is a scenario. So what do you think? How you would handle this kind of situation? So doing all these kind of activities can build, make that culture shift into a hybrid culture, which can help a diverse organization. So the fourth was about building resilience because I think it is a superpower in such kind of environment. So I had to bounce back from many of the setbacks. Many of the things didn't work for me as maybe I explained in a very good manner on my third slide, but some of them, like really, I had to try multiple iteration. And then I had to also adapt to change because it was a changing company. There were some departments that changed that don't change. And during this time, I have to maintain a positive mindset because mm, I was not speaking Japanese at that time. So I had to, like think really about like how can I navigate the organization in with a positive mindset instead of always looking at their what do you say, looking at the other side of it. Then the last thing that helped me was overcoming the unknown challenges. So I had to understand at that point, like, I need to only focus on what I can control. I cannot control every single thing that goes in the organization. And for doing that, I had to basically take small steps. I had to gather information, educate, and sometimes also seek advices from my seniors or from my peers to understand, like, okay, how can I overcome this particular factor in this particular environment? And I had to set realistic expectations. I was so driven by the language that I was like, I need to clear N2 in next 6 months, and that was not a realistic expectations. So I had to set those realistic expectations for myself to actually overcome some of my, like challenges. And I believe that building confidence by smaller, manageable step is very super important when you are overcoming something that you really don't know. And I think the last and the most important thing is that we have to embrace the adventure. So we need to shift the mindset and convert unknown into opportunity and approach it with curiosity and optimism. So I really like this book. This is the second book that I read in Japan. So it is called as Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And it help me to really understand how I can overcome some of these challenges by myself. So, what can I do to basically thrive in track? I would say embrace the culture, learn and learn and relearn. Some of the things that you have tried in the past won't work in the different setups. So you need to really try to understand, like, okay, how can I make this thing happen? And I would say language is just a tool and it is not every single thing. If you still know the language and you don't know some of the aspects of how you can really integrate into the culture or how you can do make that kind of hybrid culture, you need to have those skills with the language. And then, of course, you need to build resilience in yourself because you need to be kind to yourself and you cannot be over demanding. And the last thing that I would say is feel the fear and do it anyway. That's all. Thank you.
It was awesome, Snehal. Thanks so much. So interesting. Most of things you shared, I also experienced when I first came to Japan. I'm also coming from far away. It was around 3 years ago. At
Uh-huh.
least people could call your name by adding san. I had to change my name because I could not write in katakana. It Mesut became Mesutto. I had to
Uh-huh.
change it. So yeah, and yeah, like we also in my culture as well, like we do handshakings and sometimes hugging. So
Yeah.
congratulations, that is far away different in Japan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, the first book I read as well, the culture map. It was very good experience. So we have some questions. Maybe you can stop share and yes, I
Yes.
can do it and I can read out one by one. Okay, so here we go. The first one, as per your experience, what is the biggest disadvantage of being a non-native Japanese in Japan tech society?
Uh, Biggest disadvantage. I think it's establishing connection because when you are not a non-native Japanese speaker, you need to really hone on the skill how you can still communicate with the people because communication gives rise to every single thing that it gives rise to your network, it gives rise to your communication, it helps with day-to-day activities. But again, as I said, it's not a biggest disadvantage, I would say so. Because if you are in a tech society, most of the things should be in English at some point. So I would say introducing that kind of hybrid culture within the team would be the best thing I would say to move forward with.
Mhm. Next one may be a little bit related. In Tokyo, do you have any recommendations for where to network with other like-minded IT professionals?
It's a good question. I would recommend Compass and Meetups as as the main channel where you can actually get to know many people in Tokyo. And there are a lot of community groups like Women Who Code, and there is also like a Go community, Golang community where you can network and connect with the IT professionals.
Or like Japan test community, right?
Yes, yes, like Japan Desk community. I'm sorry.
No, just kidding. Next one. What do you recommend for people who want to relocate to Japan?
um, my recommendation would be to not underestimate the shift in the culture. I wouldn't say it depends upon organization to organization, but for example, Mercari was in a stage where it wanted to go global, so there were a lot of shift that was coming from the leadership or within the, by hiring teams and all. So that helped people. But in case when you want to mm, really relocate, you need to understand what company you're going to and what kind of culture it has. And then you need to prepare yourself before coming to Japan.
Mhm. All right. I think next two questions are related to Mercari mostly. I assume the engineering department would be predominantly English speaking. Is that correct?
Yes and no. We still write our documentation in English and Japanese. Of course, like in some teams, we have started a practice of adopting a language as the main language for the team. So there are some teams in engineering teams in Mercari that use Japanese as their first language. But we have like all the translation tool built in Slack, so the communications becomes much more easier.
Hmm, I see. The next one
And
is,
we
I'm
practice
sorry.
good etiquettes for the meeting. So our meeting notes are shared way in advance.
Cool. Next one is, how is working for Mercari like? What do you like the best? What do you dislike the most?
What do I like the best? I think I feel like challenged every day. And when you are working with really good individuals, it basically help you grow. So that's what I would say I like working in Macquarie. What I dislike, I wouldn't say dislike. I would say I like it, but
Feel
I would
free.
say if
There is no one else from Mercari, right?
there is.
There is.
No, I was saying what I dislike. I wouldn't say it's kind of a dislike, but I think it's a room to improve. Mm, room to improve would be more around um, the speed, because I believe like speed matters a lot for a company like Mercari, where the opportunity cost is quite high. So if you're not able to tap into the right market, we just lose the opportunity. And of course, I wouldn't say I don't like it, just like I hope we can improve the speed. Of course, every one of us, including me, we are working on improving the speed within the engineering.
Mhm. I see. Thank you so much. So to use the time efficiently, if you don't mind, I will leave the questions to the end of the
Yeah.
session. So if you are still in the call, we can have a collaborative Q&A session all
Mm.
together. So I will leave this to the very end.
All right. No issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really a very awesome talk and presentation. Thanks.